I want you to just close your eyes for a second and picture this.
Okay.
You are standing on a tiny metal grating,
Oh.
and right beneath your heavy steel-toed boots, there's nothing but a sheer drop of thousands of feet into a pitch-black, churning ocean.
That is terrifying.
Right. You're hundreds of miles from the near shoreline, getting absolutely battered by hurricane-force winds. And right below that grating, machinery is pulling millions of gallons of highly pressurized, volatile fluid from deep inside the Earth's crust.
Yeah, it's incredibly intense.
It's deafeningly loud.
Yeah.
The entire structure is literally vibrating in your chest.
Yeah.
It's incredibly dangerous, and you are completely, totally isolated.
You really are. I mean, it's an environment that, structurally speaking, is actively trying to destroy the very ground you're standing on.
Yeah.
Between the corrosive salt, the crushing waves, and the sheer geological pressure coming up from the well, human beings have somehow engineered a way to live and work in literally one of the most hostile places on the planet.
Exactly. And that is why today we are going on a mission to explore one of the most incredible, intimidating, and frankly, largely invisible feats of human engineering.
We really are.
We're taking a deep dive into a single, comprehensive foundation of knowledge today. We are looking at the Wikipedia article on the oil platform.
It's a massive topic.
It is. The goal for you listening is to uncover the astonishing architectural marvels, the deeply perilous human element required to run them, and the surprisingly wild afterlife of these colossal ocean structures.
Yeah, it's such a rich topic because, these platforms, they silently power the modern world, yet the vast majority of us will never, ever actually see one in person.
No, never.
They operate entirely out of sight, way out on the continental shelves, looking like these strange alien structures just rising out of the abyss.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Okay.
Because before we can even begin to fathom the floating cities of today, we have to look back at how humanity first, rather clumsily stepped off the beach to drill for oil.
Right.
We didn't just jump straight into the deep ocean.
No, not at all. I mean, the earliest days of oil extraction were entirely land-based.
Right.
You look at pioneers like Ignacy Łukasiewicz. He was the Polish engineer who built the world's first modern oil refinery way back in 1856.
Wow, 1856.
Yeah. And when the industry finally did transition to the water, it wasn't even in the ocean.
No, it wasn't. It happened in the fresh waters of Ohio, of all places.
Ohio, yeah.
In 1891, the very first submerged oil wells were drilled in Grand Lake, St. Mary's.
Uh-huh.
But, they weren't building megastructures back then.
No, definitely not.
They essentially just hammered wooden piles into a shallow, calm reservoir and slapped a wooden deck on top.
It was a very pragmatic, incremental step, and we see that exact same cautious approach a few years later, around 1896, when they finally moved to saltwater.
Out in California, right?
Exactly. In the Summerlin field in California, they didn't build freestanding rigs out in the surf. They built these wooden piers extending from the beach out into the Santa Barbara Channel, and they just drilled right through the floorboards.
Right, so they were just sort of dipping their toes in the water. They were staying safely tethered to the land.
Exact.
But, as global demand for oil skyrocketed in the 20th century, the hubris definitely grew alongside it.
Oh, absolutely.
By 1938, Humble Oil decided they were going to conquer the Gulf of Mexico. So they built a mile-long wooden trestle.
A mile long.
A full mile long, complete with heavy railway tracks straight out into the open ocean. Reading this, it feels like building a massive, intricate sandcastle right at the tide line.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
You just know the ocean's going to win that fight.
The ocean is incredibly unforgiving to rigid, fragile structures. And, a hurricane swept through and completely demolished that mile-long wooden trestle.
Just wiped it out.
Completely. It was a really harsh, really expensive lesson in wave dynamics. You cannot simply extend terrestrial architecture into the sea.
Because wood splinters.
Wood splinters, rigid structures snap. You have to engineer specifically to yield to or withstand those intense oceanic forces.
Which pushed the engineering to a massive milestone in 1947.
Yes.
Kerr-McGee completed the historic Ship Shoal Block 32 well, and this was the very first oil well drilled completely out of sight of land.
They finally cut the umbilical cord to the shore.
Exactly. But the really wild leap in technology, like the specific mechanism that unlocked the truly deep ocean, came from a total accident.
It really did.
In 1961, there was this rig called the Blue Water Rig No. 1. Can you explain that? How does a miscalculation with some pontoons accidentally birth the modern deep-sea platform?
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that the greatest leap in offshore engineering was essentially a happy accident discovered during transit.
During transit, so they weren't even drilling.
No, they were just moving it. The Blue Water Rig #1 was a submersible rig, and it rested on 4 massive pontoon columns.
Okay.
When they were towing it between drilling locations, the engineers realized the pontoons simply weren't buoyant enough to support the sheer weight of the rig and all its supplies if the hull was fully above the water.
Wait, so the rig was too heavy for its own floats? Like it was sinking?
Partially sinking, yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they were forced to tow it at a specific draft.
Draft, meaning the depth the hull sits in the water.
Exactly. They towed it halfway submerged with the massive pontoons deep underwater and only the slender top columns breaking the surface.
That sounds catchy.
It does. But while they were towing it in this awkward half-sunken state, they noticed something incredible. The motions of the rig were practically non-existent.
Really?
Yeah, it was incredibly stable even as open ocean swells just rolled right past it.
Oh, because they accidentally bypassed the wave energy?
Yes.
I mean, the energy of an ocean wave is mostly a surface phenomenon, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's turbulent at the top, but calm underneath.
That is the exact underlying physics. By keeping the massive buoyant pontoons deep underwater in the calm zone and only exposing the very narrow, slender columns to the turbulent surface waves.
The waves just pass right through.
Exactly. The waves passed right through the structure without pushing it around. Shell Oil and Blue Water Drilling looked at this and realized, hey, we don't need to permanently anchor a massive structure to the seabed to achieve stability.
They can just float.
We can operate in a floating mode. And this trial and error realization gave birth to the semi-submersible platform.
And once engineers realized they could actually float these rigs securely while drilling, I mean, it unlocked the deep ocean.
It changed everything.
They unleashed some of the most massive, heavy structures ever built by human hands. We're talking mega structures of the abyss.
Oh, absolutely.
The sheer variety of these rigs is staggering, and it seems like it's dictated entirely by how deep the water is and how angry the environment gets.
That's exactly it. You have conventional fixed platforms, which are these massive steel jackets piled directly into the seabed.
Right.
But moving deeper, you find compliant towers. These are slender, flexible towers designed not to fight the ocean, but to actively sway and yield to the ocean forces.
Kind of like a skyscraper's swing in an earthquake.
Precisely like that. Then you have tension leg platforms. Those are incredibly buoyant, but physically tethered to the ocean floor with massive cables to eliminate vertical bouncing.
And then you get to the absolute extremes, which just blow my mind.
Yeah.
Let's look at the Troll A platform in Norway. According to the source, it is a gravity-based structure that is 472 meters tall.
It's massive.
That is taller than the Empire State Building. And almost all of it is completely submerged in the freezing North Sea. It weighs 600 kilotons.
Yeah, the scale is hard to comprehend.
Or the Perdido Spar platform in the Gulf of Mexico. It costs $3 billion to build, and it's operating in water that is almost 2.5 kilometers deep.
The architecture of a spar platform like the Perdido is brilliant. It's essentially a colossal, buoyant, cylindrical hull.
Okay.
Imagine a massive tensile floating upright in the water. Most of that cylinder is deep underwater, acting as a heavy counterweight, which makes the platform up above practically immune to the wind and waves.
But the one that really broke my brain reading through this is the Hibernia platform off the coast of Canada.
Oh, Hibernia is a beast.
It is the world's heaviest offshore platform. It weighs 1.2 million tons.
Yep.
It's a concrete gravity-based structure, and it has these massive serrated outer edges. When you picture that, think of a heavyweight boxer actively leaning into a punch.
That's a good analogy.
It's designed to literally take a direct physical hit from a rogue iceberg and crush the ice with those serrated edges.
It actively fights icebergs.
Right, but this is where the logistics confuse me. Wait, they literally built a 1.2 million ton concrete island with serrated armor just to fight icebergs.
They did.
How do they even get something like that into the ocean? You can't put a 1.2 million ton concrete mountain on a truck.
No, you definitely cannot. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the construction of a gravity-based structure, or GDS, is an absolute marvel of maritime logistics.
Okay, so how do they do it?
Well, you can't build it in a dry dock. They build the base of these massive hollow concrete cylinders known as caissons in highly sheltered, deep coastal waters, usually Norwegian fjords or Scottish firths.
So they build it while it's already floating in the fjord, like a giant, hollow concrete boat.
Yes, they build it from the bottom up, right there in the water. As they pour more concrete and add thousands of tons of steel, the structure naturally gets heavier.
Right.
To keep the construction workers at water level, they slowly flood the lower hollow concrete tanks with seawater, letting the structure sink deeper and deeper into the fjord as it gets taller.
Oh, that is so clever.
Once this towering structure is totally finished, they attach a fleet of massive tugboats and carefully, agonizingly slowly, tow this 1.2 million ton artificial island out into the open ocean.
And when he gets to the GPS coordinates?
They just open the valves and flood the remaining hollow tanks. The concrete mountain sinks perfectly down to the ocean floor. Its own sheer, unfathomable mass holds it in place against the currents. That's why it's called a gravity-based structure.
That is awe-inspiring. They literally build a mountain, float it out to sea, and sink it.
Yeah.
And on the flip side of that, you have Shell's floating liquefied natural gas facility, the FLNG. It's the largest floating offshore facility in the world.
Massive ship.
488 meters long, displacing 600,000 tons.
Right.
And it never even touches the bottom.
Right.
But whether they're floating ships or 1.2 million ton concrete iceberg crushers, these aren't just unthinking robotic monoliths.
Not at all. To operate a machine of that scale, you need a highly specialized human crew living inside it 24 hours a day.
These are literally floating cities. And when you look at what it takes to actually crew one of these rigs, the only analogy that makes sense to me is living on the International Space Station.
It's very similar, actually.
Think about the environment for you listening.
Yeah.
Total isolation, complete self-reliance, and sheer claustrophobia. You can't just run to the grocery store if you forget milk.
No, the self-sufficiency is absolutely mandatory. The platforms house their own massive electrical generators.
Right.
They have industrial water desalinators that use reverse osmosis to strip the salt out of millions of gallons of seawater, just so the crew can shower and drink. They have their own medical bays.
Which they need, given the danger.
Exactly. In the North Sea, the standard rotation is a grueling 2-week shift, and you only get there by flying in a helicopter through what is often dense fog and freezing rain.
And just like astronauts, the crew speaks this hyper-specialized language.
Oh, the glossary is wild.
It really is. You have the OIM, the Offshore Installation Manager, who acts basically as the captain of the ship with ultimate authority.
Right.
Then you have tool pushers, roughnecks, roustabouts, coxswains, who specifically maintain the lifeboats. But my absolute favorite title from this source is the mud engineer.
Yes, the mud engineer.
Now, with all the advancements in tech and $3 billion megastructures, why do we still have roughnecks and mud engineers out there? Why haven't we just automated the whole thing and moved everyone back to a comfortable office on shore?
It comes down to the sheer, unpredictable physics of the Earth's crust. When you drill into the ocean floor, you are dealing with immense fluid column pressure.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
Well, the thousands of meters of ocean water sitting on top of the seabed massively increases the downhole pressures inside the drilling wells. A mud engineer isn't someone playing in the dirt.
Right, obviously.
They are highly skilled on-site chemists. They constantly manage the precise viscosity, weight, and chemical makeup of the drilling fluid, which they call the mud, that is being pumped down the hole.
And that mud is essentially the primary safety mechanism, right?
It is the very first line of defense. The physical weight of that column of heavy fluid pushing down is the only thing providing enough hydrostatic pressure to hold back the immense natural pressure of the volatile oil and gas trying to explode up the pipe.
Oh, wow. So it's a balancing act.
Exactly. Imagine you are that mud engineer. You are staring at a dial, knowing that if you mix this chemical too light, the formation pressure overwhelms your fluid, the gas rushes up, and the floor beneath you blows out. Terrifying.
But if you mix it too heavy, the weight of the mud actually fractures the delicate rock deep underground, and you lose the entire well.
So you absolutely need a human brain making real-time, high-stakes chemical adjustments based on what the geology is doing second by second. Total automation is incredibly difficult when the Earth is that unpredictable.
Exactly. Though I will say, the industry trend is pushing hard toward what they call integrated operations and subsea installations.
Right, to get people out of harm's way.
Yes. Instead of building a massive platform on the surface, they are moving the giant separators and pumps directly onto the seabed. This allows them to exploit deeper waters and, crucially, relocate workers onshore. The goal is to get people out of the blast radius and monitor the robotics via fiber optic cables.
And that massive push to get people back to shore is driven by a very dark reality. When you combine volatile hydrocarbons, extreme geological pressure, and a hostile ocean environment, The stakes are literal life and death.
They really are.
The isolation of our space station analogy becomes a massive liability the second something goes wrong, because rescue operations are nearly impossible in severe weather. The architectural evolution of these platforms is, sadly, heavily written in tragedy.
Yeah.
In March 1980, the Alexander L. Keeland, which was acting as a floating hotel providing living quarters for workers, suffered a catastrophic structural failure and capsized in a brutal North Sea storm.
Oh, man.
123 lives were lost. Then in 2001, the enormous Petrobras 36 platform exploded and sank off the coast of Brazil.
And, of course, the Deepwater Horizon.
Yes, in 2010, a blowout killed 11 people and created the worst oil spill in U.S. history, pumping over 20 million gallons into the Gulf of Mexico.
And structurally speaking, perhaps the most consequential disaster was the Piper Alpha explosion in 1988 in the UK sector of the North Sea.
Absolutely devastating.
A massive gas leak ignited, causing a chain reaction of explosions.
Yeah.
167 people died. And the investigation that followed, known as the Cullen Report, completely and fundamentally changed how rigs are built today. It heavily criticized the layout of the structure and accelerated the modern practice of completely separating the human living accommodations onto entirely different platforms.
Right.
Now, the living quarters are usually connected only by a long bridge, kept as far away from the pressurized extraction and processing areas as possible.
The whole philosophy became keep the human beings entirely segregated from the volatile fuels. But, the risks associated with these platforms extend beyond sudden catastrophic explosions.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
And honestly, incredibly ironic from a meteorological standpoint. We see a unique environmental feedback loop happening specifically in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, this is a fascinating part of the text.
These platforms emit roughly 500,000 tons of methane every single year just from operational flaring and leakage.
And methane is a remarkably potent greenhouse gas. It's far more effective at trapping atmospheric heat than CO2 in the short term.
Right. So you have this massive release of methane acting as a heavy thermal blanket over the region, combined with the localized exhaust from the fleet of massive oil tankers constantly moving around the rigs.
Yep.
This massive industrial footprint actively heats the surrounding atmosphere and subsequently the waters of the Gulf. And what is the single essential fuel source that spawns a hurricane? Warm ocean water.
The thermal battery of the storm.
So, by operating and emitting massive amounts of greenhouse gases, the platforms are actively contributing to the very atmospheric warming that acts as an incubator for the massive hurricanes that force them to shut down, evacuate their crews, and brace for devastating impact.
It's a massive feedback loop.
They are literally fueling the weather systems that destroy them.
This raises an important question regarding the intense ongoing political and societal debates surrounding offshore drilling, particularly in the United States.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I want to be very clear here for you listening. I am strictly reporting the contents of our Wikipedia source regarding these environmental risks and the ongoing political debates. I am completely neutral here. I'm not taking a left-wing stance, and I'm not taking a right-wing stance, just conveying the ideas from the text.
Absolutely, just looking at what the source says.
Exactly. So according to the text, it's a massive clash of priorities. On one side, you have undeniable, scientifically documented environmental risks ranging from localized catastrophic oil spills that devastate marine ecosystems to the broader atmospheric warming we just discussed.
Right.
On the other side, you have a global economy and infrastructure that is still fundamentally tethered to the hydrocarbons these platforms extract. It's a complex tug of war between profound ecological preservation and immediate economic and energy reliance, with incredibly heavy, valid arguments on both sides of the aisle.
And engineers are trying to find technological middle grounds to break that feedback loop.
Yes, they are.
One potential solution mentioned in the text, being researched at institutions like the University of California, Santa Barbara, is methane pyrolysis.
That's a really interesting one.
Instead of flaring off that excess natural gas into the atmosphere, they use a specialized process that operates at around 1,000 degrees Celsius to physically separate the methane molecules.
Okay.
It strips the solid carbon out, producing non-polluting hydrogen gas for energy, and the solid carbon can simply be safely pumped back underground where it came from.
It's a brilliant chemical intervention aimed at mitigating that specific greenhouse emission while still maintaining energy production.
But eventually, regardless of the technology, the geology wins. The oil and gas fields dry up, or the sheer cost of fighting the ocean makes the aging platforms too risky to maintain.
They don't last forever.
No. Because of these immense environmental and financial costs, their pumping days come to an end. So what happens to a multi-billion-dollar steel and concrete island when it's forcibly retired?
We enter the afterlife of giants.
Okay, so
Decommissioning these structures is an absolute logistical nightmare. When you build a gravity-based structure to withstand a direct hit from an iceberg, taking it apart is just as difficult as putting it together.
I can imagine.
It was estimated back in 2013 that removing all the platform structures just in British waters alone would cost roughly 30 billion pounds.
30 billion. So what does this all mean? They can't just unbolt them and haul them away cheaply, but they also can't just abandon them to rust and collapse into the shipping lanes.
Actually, in some specific cases, intentionally leaving the subsurface structures in the ocean is exactly what they do, but under a highly monitored ecological initiative known as the Rigs to Reefs program.
I looked into this from the source, and it sounds wild. Taking these hulking industrial steel towers and legally designating them as permanent artificial reefs.
Yeah.
And that's not even the wildest repurposing concept out there. Engineers are actively converting old rigs into heavy-lift offshore rocket launch pads for SpaceX.
Which makes perfect sense for rockets, really.
And there's even Saudi Arabia's project to turn a massive decommissioned oil rig into an extreme multi-level theme park.
Yeah, that one is pretty out there.
I mean, comparing the living conditions to the ISS makes sense, but turning an oil rig into an amusement park, it feels jarring. Like transforming a retired, heavily armed nuclear submarine into a family water park.
It's a surreal visual.
It really is.
Yeah.
But I have to push back on the environmental angle of this Rigs to Reefs program, leaving thousands of tons of industrial steel in the ocean. Is that actually biologically beneficial for the marine ecosystem? Or is this just a really convenient, cheap loophole for oil companies to avoid paying that 30 billion pound cleanup bill?
Your skepticism is entirely warranted, and it is a point heavily debated by marine conservationists. However, the biological data paints a really compelling picture.
Okay, what does the data say?
A marine biologist named Milton Love conducted an 11-year research study along the U.S. Pacific coast, specifically looking at these submerged steel jackets. You have to remember, the undersea portions of these platforms have been sitting in the water for 30 or 40 years.
Right, so nature kind of takes over.
Nature reclaims them. Aquatic organisms, corals, and sponges invariably attach to the steel. Love's research proved that these massive structures genuinely act as thriving, critical havens for numerous species of rockfish that are otherwise experiencing severe population declines in the broader California region.
Oh, wow. So by legally mandating that the oil companies rip the steel out of the ocean, we would actually be actively destroying a massive thriving ecosystem that has adapted to its presence over decades.
Precisely. And the architecture of the rig itself is what makes it so biologically valuable. The sheer verticality of the platform provides a unique, continuous water column habitat.
Oh, because it goes from the top all the way down.
Exactly. It allows marine life to thrive at various depths and pressures, from the dark, cold seabed right up through the sunlit surface waters. In the Gulf of Mexico alone, over 400 decommissioned structures, which is roughly 10% of all the retired platforms there, have already been successfully converted into permanent state-managed reefs.
It is just an incredible journey to trace. We started this deep dive looking at Humble Oil, awkwardly hammering flimsy wooden trestles into a beach, just crossing their fingers that a storm wouldn't blow it over.
Yeah.
And over the span of a century, humanity pushed further and further into the dark, ending up with billion-dollar, million-ton, iceberg-crushing robotic sea cities.
It's amazing.
And then when their industrial life is over, they quietly retire to become permanent artificial reefs, or rocket launch pads, or theme parks.
They really are ultimate triumphs of human ingenuity. I mean, they were born out of raw necessity, driven by terrifying trial and error, and forced to adapt to the absolute most hostile, corrosive, and volatile environments on our planet.
Truly.
They largely remain entirely invisible to the average person, yet they silently fuel the modern world while simultaneously and fundamentally reshaping the physical ecology of the ocean floor.
It really makes you think about the sheer limits of where human beings can survive and engineer solutions. Which leaves me with one final provocative thought for you to chew on.
Let's hear it.
We've talked today about the crushing pressures, the total isolation, the complex life support systems, the reverse osmosis desalinators, and the absolute necessity for humans to live inside pressurized metal cities hovering over the abyss.
Yeah.
If human engineers have successfully figured out how to build self-sustaining habitats in the darkest, most crushing and hostile environments right here on Earth, Are these oil platforms? Actually, the early blueprints humanity will one day use to colonize the subsurface oceans of alien worlds.
Oh, that's a wild thought.
Think about Jupiter's moon Europa. It's a massive ocean trapped under miles of frozen ice. When we finally drill through that ice, maybe the first structures we build in that alien ocean won't look like sleek sci-fi spaceships.
Right.
Maybe they'll look exactly like the gritty, heavy deepwater spars and semi-submersibles we've been perfecting in the Gulf of Mexico and the roaring North Sea for the last 50 years.
It's a profound perspective. The brutal engineering we use to extract energy from the abyss today might actually be the survival training we need for the stars tomorrow.
Exactly. So next time you picture that tiny metal grating suspended thousands of feet over the pitch-black ocean, don't just see an industrial rig. See the vanguard of human engineering holding the line against the abyss. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious.